LeBrun as the final hours before Game 7 tick away. Pierre, the Habs have been by far the more physical team in this series. They have out-hit Toronto by almost 100 total hits through 6 games. How much of an effect could that have in tonight's outcome?
Yeah, I think it's hard to answer that right now, Rod, but it is something I brought up with Leafs coach Sheldon Keefe on his morning availability because the numbers are pretty staggering. I mean, the Habs are at 264 hits to just 172 for the Leafs. Now, as I said to him in the question, a lot of that to me is how the two teams are built differently. You know, the Leafs are the more skilled team, the Habs are the heavier team. So in some ways, the numbers make sense. Now, I'm with Sheldon Keefe when he answered to me that he's not a big fan of that stat in terms of how it's calculated, and I'm with him. I mean, the hit stats all over the league is sort of hit and miss. But I also know what I've been watching in this series with my own eyes. And that's where I differ with Sheldon Keefe, where he didn't think it was that much of a factor in this series. I actually think it has been as the series has gotten deeper. And in particular, when Leafs defensemen are going back for puck retrievals, I think they're looking over their shoulder a bit at that human missile named Josh Anderson or that pesky Brendan Gallagher that's in your face. I think the Leafs defenders at times are rushing their outlet passes and they're feeling that pressure of a more physical team. And coaches have talked forever about the series-long investment of being the physical team against a more skilled opponent. That's what the Habs are trying to do in this series, and the Habs were #1 in the NHL in the regular season in hits, so this was clearly their MO. Now, is it enough to upset the Leafs tonight, or will the Leafs prevail in Game 7? The real question for the Leafs, Rod, to me, is that even if they win tonight, how much of an impact will the Habs getting their pound of flesh over 7 games have in a second-round series with Winnipeg if the Leafs prevail? They've already lost Jake Muzzin for at least 3 weeks, and so I think that's a broader question that I'm sure the Leafs would rather deal with after a win, but we'll see what happens tonight.
And Pierre, the Leafs are at home tonight, so they do have last line change. And I ask this, considering, of course, that Montreal's won 2 of the 3 games in Toronto in this series. How important will it be for Sheldon Keefe then to use that last change to the team's advantage?
I think it is going to be important. And, you know, at the outset of the series, he talked about how he didn't really chase matchups that way. Certainly when he had a healthy lineup, he could say that because you could put Matthews or Tavares over the boards at any time you wanted. But once they lost Tavares, he's had to change that certainly over the last few games. And he's really going to need to change it for tonight because, you know, I think Austin Matthews has had to take a lot more defensive zone faceoffs than he's used to because of the absence of John Tavares. And quite frankly, obviously, I think because Sheldon Keefe doesn't have the same trust with his other lines in some of those situations. But I think the key for Game 7 for Sheldon Keefe and the Leafs is to try and penalize the Habs off icing calls in terms of putting Matthews and Marner over the boards for that next face-off. And certainly whenever the Habs do put out their third D pairing, which was certainly rare in Game 6, but if there's an offensive zone face-off in that situation, make sure you get Matthews and Marner out there. That, to me, is going to be important for the Leafs. It's not been Keefe's MO throughout the regular season. Not a guy that often chases that, but I think he has to do it in Game 7 at home to try and liberate Matthews and Marner to get more looks offensively.
Well, the Maple Leafs have lost 7 straight potential series-clinching games that is tied for second longest among streaks in NHL history. Pierre LeBrun, thank you for this.